Transitions used to feel like opportunities, a new job, a move to a different city, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. You navigated them with a certain confidence, even when they were difficult, because time felt abundant. You had decades ahead to figure things out, to recover from mistakes, to start over if needed. But after 50, transitions feel different. They don't feel like new beginnings. They feel like endings, like time running out. The career transition isn't an exciting pivot. It's a last chance to do something meaningful before retirement. The relationship ending isn't a fresh start. It's facing the possibility of being alone for whatever time remains. The health diagnosis isn't a wake-up call. It's a reminder that your body is declining and there's no reversing it. And this awareness, that time is finite, that opportunities are narrowing, that some doors have closed permanently, makes every transition feel heavier, more urgent, more final. You're not just navigating change anymore. You're navigating change while feeling the pressure of a ticking clock. And that pressure changes everything. It makes you desperate, paralyzed, willing to settle for less because starting over feels impossible. But mastering transitions in the second half of life isn't about pretending time isn't running out. It's about learning to move through change precisely because time is running out. Here's the paradox. The awareness that time is running out should make transitions easier. It should clarify your priorities, eliminate distractions, and motivate you to act decisively. After all, you don't have time to waste anymore. You can't afford to stay in situations that aren't working or delay changes you know you need to make. But instead of creating clarity, the awareness of limited time creates panic. And panic doesn't make you decisive. It makes you freeze. You become so afraid of making the wrong choice, of wasting precious years on a path that doesn't work out, that you make no choice at all. You stay stuck in the transition, unable to move forward or backward, watching time pass while you agonize over what to do. The urgency that should propel you forward becomes the weight that keeps you paralyzed. Part of the problem is that transitions in the second half of life carry different stakes than they did earlier. When you were younger, failure was recoverable. You could try something, fail, and start over. You had the energy, the time, the resources to bounce back. But now, failure feels catastrophic. If you leave your job and the new career doesn't work out, you might not have another chance. If you end your marriage and regret it, you might spend the rest of your life alone. If you invest your savings in something that fails, you might not be able to rebuild. So you overanalyze every decision, trying to guarantee success before you commit. But guarantees don't exist. And while you're waiting for certainty, you're wasting the very time you're trying to protect. The paradox deepens when you consider that staying in the transition, living in limbo, is often more damaging than making an imperfect choice and moving forward. When you're stuck between what was and what could be, you're not fully present anywhere. You're not committed to making your current situation work because you're constantly thinking about leaving. But you're also not taking the steps to actually leave because you're too afraid of what comes next. So you exist in a painful middle space where nothing feels good and nothing changes. And that limbo drains you. It consumes your energy, your hope, your sense of agency. You convince yourself that you're being careful, thoughtful, prudent, but really, you're just afraid. And fear disguised as caution is still fear. Another layer of the paradox is that the transitions you fear most are often the ones you need most. The job that's draining you, the relationship that's become hollow, the lifestyle that no longer fits. You know these things aren't working. You've known for years. But leaving them feels impossible because they're familiar. They're what you know. And starting over, learning new skills, meeting new people, building a new life feels exhausting when you're already tired. So you tell yourself that staying is the practical choice, that it's too late to change, that you should be grateful for what you have instead of chasing something different, but that gratitude is just resignation. And resignation isn't peace, it's slow death. You're spending the time you have left maintaining a life that doesn't nourish you because you're too afraid to risk building one that might. The cultural narrative doesn't help. Society tells you that the second half of life is about settling down, not starting over, that you should have your life figured out by now, that major transitions, career changes, relationship endings, relocations, are for people in their 20s and 30s, not their 50s and 60s. So when you're facing a transition at this age, you feel embarrassed, like you failed at life, like you should have made better choices earlier so you wouldn't be in this position now. And that shame makes the transition even harder. You're not just navigating change, you're navigating change while feeling like you're doing it wrong, like you're behind, like everyone else has it figured out, and you're the only one still struggling. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Transitions in the second half of life are harder not because you're doing them wrong, but because you're doing them with full awareness of what's at stake. When you were younger, you had the luxury of naivety. You could take risks without fully understanding the consequences. You could fail and bounce back because you didn't yet know how hard failure could be. But now you know. You've lived long enough to see how things can go wrong. You've experienced loss, disappointment, regret, and that knowledge makes you careful. Sometimes too careful. You're trying to protect yourself from pain you've already felt. But in protecting yourself, you're also preventing growth. You're choosing safety over aliveness, and safety, when taken too far, becomes its own kind of death. The cruelest part of the paradox is this. The transitions you're avoiding because you think you don't have time are actually costing you the time you have left. Every day you spend in a job you hate is a day you're not spending doing work that matters. Every year you stay in a relationship that's dead is a year you're not experiencing real connection. Every month you delay the change you know you need is a month you're trading for the illusion of stability. And when you finally look back, whether that's in 5 years or 20, you won't remember the transition as the hard part. You'll remember the years you spent stuck in limbo, too afraid to move as the real tragedy. Because time was running out. And instead of using it, you wasted it waiting for a permission or certainty or courage that never came. Mastering transitions in the second half of life begins with accepting that you won't have certainty. This is the first and most difficult shift. You want to know that the change you're making will work out, that the new job will be fulfilling, that leaving the relationship will lead to something better, that the risk you're taking will pay off. But you can't know any of that, and waiting for certainty is just another way of staying stuck. The shift required is learning to act in the face of uncertainty, not recklessly, not impulsively, but deliberately, with full awareness that you don't know how it will turn out. This is terrifying, but it's also liberating, because once you accept that certainty isn't available, you stop wasting energy trying to manufacture it. You stop overanalyzing every possible outcome. You make a choice based on the best information you have, and you move forward. And that movement, even if it's imperfect, even if it leads somewhere unexpected, is better than paralysis. The next shift is redefining what success means in a transition. When you were younger, success probably meant achieving a specific outcome, getting the promotion, making the relationship work, reaching the goal you set. But in the second half of life, success isn't about outcomes, it's about integrity. Did you make a choice that aligned with your values? Did you act with courage even when you were afraid? Did you honor what you needed instead of what was expected of you? These are the measures of success now, because outcomes are partly out of your control. You can do everything right and still have the transition not work out the way you hoped, but you can always control whether you acted with integrity. And when the transition is hard, and it will be hard, that integrity is what sustains you, not the outcome. The knowledge that you made the choice that was true for you. Another critical shift is learning to tolerate the discomfort of the in-between. Transitions are uncomfortable by nature. You're leaving something familiar before you've arrived at something new. You're in limbo, and that limbo feels unbearable. Your mind wants resolution. It wants to know what's next. But rushing through the transition just to escape discomfort often leads to poor choices. You take the first job offer instead of waiting for the right one. You jump into a new relationship to avoid being alone. You make decisions based on fear instead of clarity. The shift required is learning to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, to tolerate the liminal space without collapsing or forcing premature closure. This doesn't mean staying stuck forever. It means giving yourself time to process, to grieve what you're leaving, to explore what you actually want before committing to what's next. And that time, however uncomfortable, is where wisdom emerges. One of the most powerful practices for mastering transitions is grieving what you're losing. Even when the transition is positive, even when you're leaving something that wasn't working, there's loss. You're losing familiarity, identity, the version of yourself that existed in that context. And if you don't grieve that loss, it follows you into the next phase. You bring unprocessed sadness, anger, or regret into the new situation, and it contaminates it. So you have to make space for grief. Not forever. Not in a way that keeps you stuck, but enough to acknowledge what's ending, to honor what that chapter gave you, even if it also hurt you, to say goodbye properly instead of just running away. This grief work feels like it slows you down, but it actually speeds up your transition because you're not carrying the weight of the past into the future. You're moving forward lighter. Mastering transitions also requires distinguishing between fear and intuition. Both can make you hesitate. Both can make you question whether you're making the right choice. But fear is usually catastrophic. It imagines the worst-case scenario and presents it as inevitable. Fear says, if you leave this job, you'll never find another one. You'll run out of money and end up alone and destitute. Intuition, on the other hand, is quieter. It doesn't catastrophize. It just offers information. Intuition says, this doesn't feel right. Something is off. I need more time to think about this. Learning to distinguish between these two voices is essential. Because if you listen to fear, you'll never move. You'll stay stuck in situations that are destroying you because fear will always have a reason to stay. But if you can tune into intuition, if you can hear that quiet, calm voice beneath the panic, it will guide you, not to safety, but to what's true. Another important shift is recognizing that transitions are rarely linear. You don't cleanly move from one phase to the next. You oscillate. Some days you're committed to the change. Other days you doubt everything and want to go back. Some weeks you feel strong and capable. Other weeks you feel like you've made a terrible mistake. This oscillation doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It's just how transitions work. You're in the messy middle where nothing is settled yet. And trying to force linearity, trying to be confident and committed every single day just adds pressure that makes it harder. Instead, you have to allow the oscillation, to expect it, to not interpret doubt as evidence that you made the wrong choice. Doubt is part of the process, and it doesn't mean anything other than that you're human and transitions are hard. One of the most helpful practices during a transition is to focus on the next right step instead of the entire path. When you're in the middle of a major life change, thinking about everything you need to do to get to the other side is overwhelming. You start imagining all the obstacles, all the uncertainties, all the things that could go wrong, and that overwhelm paralyzes you. So instead of focusing on the whole journey, just focus on the next step. What's the one thing you need to do today to move forward? Not this week, not this month, today. And tomorrow, you ask the same question. This approach keeps you grounded in the present instead of spiraling into anxiety about the future, and it creates momentum. Because each small step you take builds confidence. You prove to yourself that you can do this, not all at once, but one step at a time. It's also essential to build support during transitions, not cheerleaders who tell you everything will be fine, but people who can hold space for the complexity, who can acknowledge that yes, this is hard, and no, you don't know how it will turn out, and that's okay. People who've been through their own major transitions and can offer perspective without trying to fix you. This support is critical because transitions are isolating. You're leaving behind the people and structures that used to give you identity and belonging. And until you build new ones, you're in a vulnerable space. Having even one or two people who can witness that vulnerability without judgment makes the transition more bearable. And it reminds you that you're not alone, that other people have walked this path and survived, that you will too. Another key insight is that transitions often require you to let go of who you were in order to become who you're meant to be, and that letting go feels like losing yourself. The identity you built over decades, the career person, the married person, the parent, the competent one, is ending. And you don't yet know who you'll be on the other side. So you're in this strange space where you're not who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. And that identity void is terrifying. Your mind wants to fill it immediately, to grab onto a new identity. But rushing that process often leads to taking on identities that don't actually fit. The shift required is to tolerate not knowing who you are for a while, to be in the question instead of forcing an answer. And eventually, through the process of living in the transition, a new sense of self emerges. Not because you constructed it, but because you discovered it through the act of moving forward. Transitions in the second half of life also require you to reckon with mortality, not in a morbid way, but in an honest way. You're aware that you have fewer years ahead than behind, that this transition might be one of the last major ones you navigate, and that awareness can either paralyze you or focus you. It paralyzes you if you let fear dominate, if you spend your remaining time protecting yourself from risk instead of living, but it focuses you if you let it clarify what matters. If you use the awareness of limited time to cut through the noise and focus on what's essential, to stop wasting time on things that don't align with your values, to make choices based on what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. Mortality, when faced directly, becomes a teacher. It shows you what's important, and it gives you permission to let go of what's not. One of the most challenging aspects of mastering transitions is accepting that you might not get it right. You might make this change and realize a year from now that it wasn't what you thought it would be. You might leave the marriage and discover that being alone is harder than you imagined. You might start the new career and find that it's not fulfilling in the way you hoped. And that possibility that you might get it wrong is what keeps so many people stuck. But here's the truth. Getting it wrong is still better than not trying, because at least you'll know. You won't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. You'll have lived. You'll have tried. And even if it doesn't work out, you'll learn something about yourself. You'll develop resilience. You'll discover capacities you didn't know you had. And that knowledge, that growth, is valuable regardless of the outcome. Mastering transitions also means managing your expectations. You're probably hoping that once you get through this transition, everything will be better. That the new job will solve your dissatisfaction. That the ended relationship will free you to find real love. That the move to a new city will give you the fresh start you need. But transitions don't solve everything. They just shift the context. You bring yourself, your patterns, your wounds, your habits into the new situation. And if you haven't done the internal work, the same problems show up in different forms. So part of mastering the transition is recognizing that external change isn't enough. You also have to change internally. You have to address the patterns that contributed to the situation you're leaving. Otherwise, you'll just recreate the same dynamics in a new setting. And that realization that you're part of the equation is humbling. But it's also empowering because it means you have agency. You're not just a victim of circumstance. You're a participant in your own life, and you can choose to participate differently. Finally, mastering transitions requires patience, not passive waiting, but active patience. The understanding that transitions take time, that healing takes time, that building a new life takes time, and that rushing the process doesn't make it go faster, it just makes it messier. You have to trust that even when progress feels slow or invisible, something is happening. You're integrating, you're adjusting, you're becoming someone new. And that becoming can't be forced. It unfolds at its own pace. Your job is to show up, to take the next step, to stay engaged with the process, even when it's uncomfortable, and to trust that on the other side of this transition, there's a version of you waiting. Not a perfect version, but a more authentic one. Someone who chose growth over safety, change over stagnation, life over the illusion of security. And that person is worth the discomfort of getting there. When you start mastering transitions, instead of resisting them, The first thing that changes is your relationship with uncertainty. You stop needing to know exactly how things will turn out before you act. You develop the capacity to move forward even when you're scared, even when you can't see the whole path. And that capacity is freedom. You're no longer paralyzed by the need for guarantees. You can make choices based on what feels true instead of what feels safe. And that shift opens up possibilities you couldn't see when you were stuck. You also stop wasting time in limbo. Instead of spending years agonizing over whether to make a change, you make the change and deal with whatever comes. And even when the transition is hard, even when you doubt yourself or things don't go as planned, you're moving, you're living, you're not trapped in the painful middle space of indecision. And that movement, that forward momentum, creates energy. It reminds you that you're capable, that you can handle difficulty, that you're stronger than you thought. Your sense of identity becomes more flexible. You stop clinging to who you were and become more comfortable with not knowing exactly who you are. You allow yourself to evolve, to try things that don't fit your old self-image, to surprise yourself. And that flexibility makes life feel less rigid, less trapped. You're not defending a fixed identity anymore. You're discovering who you're becoming. And that discovery is what makes the second half of life interesting instead of just a slow decline toward the end. Over time, you realize that the transitions you feared most were actually the ones that brought the most growth. Not because they were easy or because everything worked out perfectly, but because they forced you to step into a bigger version of yourself, to develop capacities you didn't know you had, to live with courage instead of resignation. And that growth, that expansion, is what gives the remaining years meaning. You're not just passing time, you're living fully, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Time is running out. That's not pessimism. That's reality. You don't have unlimited years ahead to figure things out, to delay changes, to wait for the perfect moment. The transitions you're avoiding because they feel too hard or too risky are costing you the time you have left. Every day you spend in a situation that's not working is a day you're not spending building something better. Every year you stay stuck in limbo is a year you're trading for the illusion of safety. And when you look back, whether that's in 5 years or 20, you won't remember the fear of the transition. You'll remember the years you spent stuck, too afraid to move, as the real loss. Mastering transitions in the second half of life isn't about having all the answers or guaranteeing success. It's about acting with integrity even when you're uncertain. It's about tolerating discomfort instead of avoiding it. It's about grieving what you're losing while moving toward what you need. It's about taking the next right step, even when you can't see the whole path. And yes, it's hard. Yes, you might get it wrong. Yes, the outcome might not be what you hoped. But trying and failing is still better than not trying at all. Because at least you lived. At least you chose growth over stagnation. At least you used the time you had instead of wasting it, waiting for permission or certainty that never comes. So stop waiting. Stop overanalyzing. Stop protecting yourself from the very changes that could give your remaining years meaning. Make the choice you've been avoiding. Take the step you've been postponing. Move through the transition you've been resisting, not because it's easy, but because time is finite, and you don't have the luxury of staying stuck anymore. The life you want is on the other side of the fear. And the only way to get there is to move through it. So move now, while you still can.